Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
We've all got used to very turbulent, tumultuous parliament sessions, but this one is particularly stormy. The opposition is well armed with a range of issues to target the government with, and it would be safe to say that this session has largely been a washout so far. To talk to us more about what the opposition strategy is, what do they expect from the government, and what in the remaining 1 week of parliament, we have with us a very prominent opposition leader, RJD MP, Rajya Sabha MP, Mr. Manoj Jha. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today at the print.
Thank you to the entire team of the print, Ruhi.
Thank you. So let's begin with this very evocative speech that you gave when you said everybody should apologize. There should be collective apology for those who've lost their lives in the second wave of the COVID, and that really is the spirit of how the country at this point perhaps should approach the pandemic, should approach the issues that we are facing. It was, I would say, one of the finer speeches in Parliament that we have seen. But somewhere down the line, if you see how this session has been, the kind of acrimony, bitterness between the government and the opposition, is that spirit of collectiveness lost?
I'll tell you very frankly, many people, when they ask me about that speech, my first reaction was that I don't want ever to make another speech of that kind, because I don't want to see my nation, my people facing that kind of helplessness, a kind of despair, nothing visible in terms of solace or in terms of, say, whatever positive you see. So having said that, I believe when you talk about apology, we waited for the government to apologize. And government, not only central government, all governments who messed up or fussed data, who were in denial mode. And ironically, unfortunately, the day I made my speech, the same day there was an answer in Rajya Sabha, there was no death on account of unavailability of oxygen. I think that probably hit everybody, because this pandemic, the impact of this pandemic, Ruiji, you, me, people in media, people on streets, in villages, this was one pandemic because 1918 was out of the memory of this nation. But this pandemic impacted everyone. Everyone lost someone known to them. Now, what do we expect out of it? Now, there was a discussion for 4 hours, but we didn't see the government actually saying that we didn't do well. And I don't mean, again, only the central government, several state governments. And then the spirit of collective thinking, collective wisdom, I think that should have reflected on all other issues, including COVID management or mismanagement. For instance, farm laws. I mean, farmers are there for 8 months. It's the longest movement I have ever seen. It in terms of trajectory, it goes beyond JP movement. Then you have price rise. It has hit everyone. I won't say only the lower income group, even the middle income group, even the upper middle income group. Then you have unemployment. Even the government data says it's at the top in last 50 years. Now, then suddenly before the start of the session, you had revelations in terms of Pegasus. Now, all the things combined together, and looking at the history of parliamentary democracy, where the role of the ruling party is to behave in a much more, say, suave manner, trying to take everybody along, trying to take the opposition along and discuss it. If you call it non-issue, prove that after the discussion it's a non-issue, opposition will accept, because you have the majority in both the houses. In Lok Sabha, you have natural majority. In Rajya Sabha, you have artificial managed majority. Now, I don't know who is advising this government. It is not even in the interest of this government, the political party called BJP, to run parliament like this, where so many important things had to be discussed. So when it is a washout, I'll tell you, it pains me to say that a discussion in parliament sends positive message to the people. As you rightly said about the COVID discussion, it was only 4-hour discussion, but the government should be ready to be open to When you win election, you form the government. But parliament is not simply government. Parliament is government as well as opposition. Mr. Prime Minister is my Prime Minister as well. So where will I take my complaints? Where will the opposition will take its issues? I think that kind of magnanimity which we wanted to see in this government and the important people, that's a missing link.
Right. Mr. Jha, you rightly pointed out this is a parliamentary democracy, and it is the job, it is the responsibility, it's the duty of the opposition to raise issues in parliament, to ask, to demand from the government that discussions take place on important issues. But given how we've seen the last few sessions also, and as I said, this one is even stormier, what is the way out of this logjam? Because there has to be conduct of legislative business. Bills have to be passed with discussion. We see how bills are being passed in minutes in the Lok Sabha without any discussion. What is the way out? Are there back channel talks with the governments that now don't happen, which perhaps used to happen earlier when politics was not as bitter?
First of all, I'll tell you, very frankly, on your channel, on your platform, that not everybody in this government has the mandate to open the back channel talk and take it to logical conclusion. The mandate is very limited. So even if some people meet or they say, let's resolve it, how do you resolve it? Let's say that these are the issues. I said price rise, inflation, unemployment, farm laws, Pegasus, not necessarily in the same order. Order could be reversed or order could be changed. But what is important that this logjam can be broken. It is not very difficult. Sarpalli Radhakrishnan said in his famous remark that parliament is meant to legislate and to deliberate. Even within legislation, you had a scope for deliberation. Now what happens? Minister moves the bill. Minister passes the bill. Average time is 7-8 minutes, 9 minutes. Now what happens? और आप कहते हो कि ये तो मामूली bill है. This is ordinary bill. In fact, whichever bill, if the bill has to be brought, it cannot be called ordinary. It should draw the wider consultation. So it is very unfortunate, but I believe that the logjam can simply be broken by the fact that the government should say, fine, let's talk. I mean, this is not for the first time. In Nehru's time, lots of such cases were discussed. And in Nehru's time in 1952, let me tell you, the size of the opposition was minuscule. Yet opposition used to get a kind of accommodation, a kind of acceptance. Imagine in 57, Atalji getting 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Is it possible in the format of numerical strength deciding your time? Now, it is not possible. So important is that you must listen to the voices of opposition. What has prevailed in this government, they believe, and which I have said earlier in my writings also, majority in parliament is necessary to form the government, but that's not a license to usher in a majoritarian government. And this government believes because it has a majority, it has a license to decide the agenda, decide the priorities. If this mindset could be set aside, because it's not a positive signal, they may not be forever. Maybe 24 they are not there, or 29 they are not there. But if this trend continues, this might become the new normal, and the casualty would be parliamentary democracy. You might make a magnificent, huge building for a new parliament, but it is a process of museumization of parliamentary democracy.
So let's talk a little bit about the opposition strategy. How much conversation is happening between opposition parties? I mean, of course, we saw Mr. Rahul Gandhi's breakfast meeting, after which you were also riding a bicycle, along with Mr. Gandhi. But more beyond the very obvious meetings and conversations, is there more coordination and strategy? Because that's one thing that has lacked, is floor coordination between the opposition.
I'll tell you, this time I'm finding it much, much better than what it used to be earlier. That Rahulji's breakfast and cycle ride, it had optical, more of a value. So it got space almost every day. We meet in parliament. before the start of the session. Sometimes it is both the houses together, the floor leaders from both the houses. There are wide variety of suggestions. They come. Important is all political parties, which is part of the basket of opposition parties. They come with their own background. For instance, I come from Bihar, somebody is from UP or Andhra or Tamil Nadu. So there are state specific issues, and there are certain issues which we call a wrong word, but we call it national level issues. Now, there is a constant discussion on that, how to prioritize that. And let me tell you, so far, it has been very, very smooth. And as I said earlier, I had not seen that kind of floor coordination earlier. If this floor coordination is not simply for the sake of opposing the government, it's for ready for to negotiate with the government. We want the government to take 2 steps. Believe me, I promise through you, will take 4 steps. But the government, if they believe that fine, we are getting our bills passed, they'll get the bills passed. We can't stop them. But the fact is, which is being undermined, not the opposition, under what is being undermined, and which is should be sad news for everybody, that the parliamentary decorum, parliamentary discourse, and parliamentary democracy, the thoughts are being undermined, and it shall be very difficult for any future government to retrieve. They might enjoy this kind of framework because that suits the ruling dispensation.
Right. But are there any disagreements between the opposition? Because there are, as you mentioned, there are so many issues. There's Pegasus, there's COVID management or mismanagement, there's the farmer issue. Is there a lack of agreement on what the primary focus or primary weapon to target the government with should be? Because even within the Congress party, there are leaders like Mr. Tharoor who say Pegasus has no resonance on the ground.
Look, resonance or no resonance, I agree. First of all, let me respond to your first part of your query. That's not disagreement. It's all about if you say Pegasus A, B, inflation and unemployment, C, farm laws, and D, COVID mismanagement and preparation for the potential or possible third wave. It could be on a daily basis, it could be which should be number 1, number 2, number 3. There is no agreement that it shouldn't be there. We believe Pegasus does not have resonance. I agree. Beyond the Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, it's a metro-centered discourse. But believe me, Bofors also initially was only metro-centered discourse. Now, if we look at the scale and extent of hacking, Supreme Court, if you just read 1 or 2 observations today, that tells you if Supreme Court is ready to discuss. It is being discussed in media. Parliament, that's the body of representatives. What stops Parliament in discussing that? I think this is the message which combined opposition is trying to give, except for the fact that on a given day, priority number 1 should be this, priority number 2 should be this.
Right. Now, this opposition unity that we've been witnessing in this session of Parliament is interesting. It's also interesting because it's in the run-up to the 2024 elections. There's talk of a larger non-BJP coalition. There are various parties which have thrown their hats into the ring. Very honestly, if you were to answer, do you think a larger coalition of motley opposition parties is a feasible solution?
I think if we look at the Indian Constitution, which says India is the union of states. When you look at this phrase, union of states, so states might decide what shall be the shape and color of the union government. I think we are reaching that kind of politics where the states, we agree, my leader Tejashwi has also said, Congress has more than 200 plus seats where it fights BJP 101. Now, rest of the seats, regional parties are challenging BJP. So I think if that kind of coalition, but again, I'll tell you, it cannot simply be a coalition of political parties. It has to be a coalition of ideas. It has to be a coalition of struggle. It has to be a coalition of, everyday issues. Health, unemployment, education, jobs, so many things. But fundamentally, it has to be a coalition to protect the very idea of liberty, freedom, dignity, which is actually going out of our vocabulary, our discourse. And finally, Ruiji, I must tell you, we also have to provide an alternative discourse of, for political language or political conversation. Of late, what we have seen that political rivals are treated as enemies. So this language of enemies, enmity, or war vocabulary which is employed to address each other, I think that has to be jettisoned. These all things should be the plan for the opposition parties, which I must say they are very desperate to come together, not for their survival, but for the survival of certain core values, which we are seeing that they are getting lost in the din.
So would you say the BJP is largely responsible for this, as you mentioned, the bitterness that has seeped into Indian politics, where it's almost like war, the kind of civility we saw is missing?
I'll tell you, I will primarily hold BJP, the present BJP. Let me tell you, I'm reading a very interesting book, Jugalbandi, the BJP before Narendra Modi ji. But interestingly, I'll primarily hold them responsible. But what happens? Look at the television debate. Now, BJP, in fact, started toning up this language. Now, many opposition parties have picked up this language. What happens? You might defeat BJP electorally. Arithmetic is very important. But if this language wins, language of enmity, language of employed by through war vocabulary, I think it is going to destroy whatever was civil in our politics. And that should be a dangerous signal, not only for opposition parties, but also for the BJP, that because this vocabulary, these kind of employment of language of enmity, it leaves none. It destroys everybody. And as we say, in the end, everybody is dead.
Right. Well, we do see how politics has become fairly personality centric. It was earlier as well, but then this came the 90s when things were, more about coalitions. But again, it has become more personality centric, which perhaps Mr. Modi has ushered in that era yet again. And you need a face to take the BJP on, whether it was Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal, whether it was Arvind Kejriwal in Delhi. It's these faces who've succeeded to take the BJP machinery down. Would you be okay with a face as the prime ministerial candidate in 2024 if you were part of a larger opposition coalition? And would you be okay with that face of Mr. Rahul Gandhi?
I'll tell you, I somehow knew this question is coming. This is one question which can be predicted in any interview. This is one question which कि हम पढ़ते वक्त student life में we used to say in graduation कि Akbar was a national monarch. Explain. This question was certain every exam.
So ये भी आता ही आपके हर interview.
So I'll tell you very interestingly what, I'm personally speaking not very comfortable with person-centered politics. Frankly speaking, I know neoliberalism has impacted many things in our life, some for the good, some for the bad, and some for the ugly. Now, what happens when you in a diverse country like India? Again, I look at India as a union of states. When you talk through that person-centered, it becomes a brand. And when you talk through the brand, issues are left. I think 2004, I go back to 2004. Nobody knew who is going to be the prime minister.
Right.
There was a very popular face in Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. I think more than the face, we need to work on the base. There are many faces from north, from south. More often than not, we get fixated with a face from the north or east or south. There could be anybody from Tamil Nadu. There are so many leaders from Andhra, from Telangana, from Bihar, from Bengal, Rahul Gandhi ji. So I think if we waste our energy in say talking through the face, we leave larger issues, and those larger issues are much more important than anybody, whether it is Narendra Modi ji or Rahul Gandhi ji, and for that matter, Mamata ji.
But you do need a face to talk about those larger issues, right? There has to be one concerted face, politician that you project who can go to the people and say, look, this is what we stand for.
I'll tell you very frankly, then that means whatever I said in my earlier response has no meaning. I believe, I tell you, you know, world over, there has been a trend of face in last 15, 20 years. And democracy has got weakened when we talk through the face. Face becomes bigger than the institution. I mean, we all have seen in our own times. Forget only, I'm not talking about Modi ji. 45 years back, there was a rallying around a face. Now the face did not care for the institution. Now the face here is not concerned at all about institutions. And democracy is all about protecting and promoting institutions. So the ideas for the opposition should be to work on everything else. And once we, as I said, India is a union of states, we win the election, I tell you, there is no dearth of face. That might not be very good looking face, very sophisticated. That face and that person might not change his dress in a day thrice or four times, but at least he or she will be concerned to change the face of this nation, which needs immediate repair, and I believe a kind of touch which is more gentle, more human.
Right. Okay, now let's move away from national politics to your state. Some interesting things happening there. We can see Mr. Nitish Kumar, who's in alliance with the BJP, in a way putting the BJP in a corner, demanding a discussion on the Pegasus matter, also demanding a caste census, both iffy issues for his allies. So how do you view that? What do you think is happening there?
I'll tell you, on caste census, I remember many a time when Tejashwi ji took out march in Bihar, or for that matter, I raised that issue in parliament. I did not get any support from JDU. Members were there. I got support from DMK. I got support from BSP. I got support from SP. Now, that tells you the story. That is why I believe that about, and Pegasus, again, he waited and he saw the national media talking about it, about Nitish ji. And my first response was that I would want him to stick to his position, because more often than not, we have seen after a few days, he said that I didn't mean this. It was misinterpreted by the media. I hope he doesn't do it. If he doesn't do it, we can think that actually there is some churning going on in his mind. And finally, I'll tell you about Nitish ji. I personally, as I observed him, he, whenever he plays cards, he keeps one on the table, one in the pocket. And unless he tells the world, everybody, that there is no card in the pocket, whatever is there is on the table, I think then people will believe. Otherwise, it's very difficult to believe him, his position, because we have seen how the mandate of 2015 was flouted in 2017.
Right. But you know, in 2015, the coalition was able to defeat Narendra Modi and Amit Shah. Do you see that happening again? Do you see a possibility of JDU, RJD coming together again, joining hands again? Is Mr. Tejashwi Yadav okay with a possibility like that?
I'll tell you very frankly, political parties should be seen in terms of social base and constituency. We fought without JDU. We had a different kind of alliance. The vote share between the two formations is only 11,980 votes. Votes, percentage terms, 0.08%. So probably, I think the base which Nitish ji thought he carries, there has been erosion in that. And a large chunk has come to the alliance led by Tejashwi ji. Now, as I said, political parties are about base and constituencies. His constituency is shifting. He might, after gaining 40 odd seats, he might remain the chief minister. But the fact is, he remains a managerial leader. He's not a mass leader anymore. So the difference between a managerial leader and a mass leader is that the managerial leader depends on the kripa of somebody from Delhi or Nagpur, or for that matter, any. I think that churning is taking place in Bihar, and that churning tells people that they look at the next election, and maybe much before the next election, you will see change in Bihar.
Right. But does Mr. Tejasvi Yadav have national ambitions? Do you see him as perhaps a future prime ministerial candidate at some point.
I'll tell you some of the things which I'm sure you had covered his campaign. There is something very natural to him, the crowd connect. He doesn't have to prepare for it. He instantly connects. Second, he's a very good listener. But then his priorities as of now, because through him, RJD had presented a manifesto, which is a very progressive manifesto. Bihar is lagging behind on all parameters. Niti Aayog recently also was worried about Bihar. So are we. So is Tejashwi ji. So his focus is that. And of course, yes, he's only 31 years old. And after doing his job, which Bihar expects him to do, of course, yes, even in any possible alliance into 2024, he'll have a huge role. And all depends on how things shape up 2024. He'll not say no to any kind of assignment which is available to him.
Right. Okay, before I let you go, Mr. Jha, just one last question. Now, next week of Parliament, is it going to be as stormy? Also, given how popular the Prime Minister is, that's something that voters have spoken through multiple elections. Do you think stalling the House is something that perhaps goes against the opposition's image? Is that a cause of worry? I'm not saying the opposition shouldn't do it, but I'm just saying in terms of perception.
Look, I'll tell you, you are interviewing me, and I don't consider you part of the mainstream media. Mainstream for us is mainstream media doesn't cover a position in the manner you are doing it. Even Prime Minister sir, is aware what is the reason that Parliament is not functioning. It just takes him to give mandate to his negotiators, Parliamentary Affairs Minister, anybody. Go, please open man. We have nothing to hide on Pegasus. We have nothing to hide on COVID mismanagement. We have nothing to hide on unemployment, inflation, farm laws. If you do that, I'll just give you one example. You say farmers pe baat karne ke liye taiyar hai, but we'll not repeal the farm laws. Then what is the point of talking? When you set a precondition for a conversation, it is not conversation. It's a monologue. And unfortunately, this government thrives in monologue. They have forgotten what dialogue means. Popularity is immense. I don't disagree, even in spite of everything. But evaporation of popularity does not take too many days. It might be within hours. And I hope he realizes that. That's all I can say.
Right. All right, Mr. Manoj Jha, thank you so much for this insightful interview, walking us through the opposition strategy and really telling us how the spirit of a parliamentary democracy needs to be upheld. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.